What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about recursive HTML using Angular 2 Plus. And to give you a little bit of a backstory, I'm actually going to be covering some of the content that's on my blog. So if you look at www.fullheapdeveloper.com/posts/recursive-html, you'll find this blog post. And don't worry, I'm going to put this URL in the description so you'll have it. Some people are more visual learners, and I know that, so I wanted to do this video and walk through step by step so you can A, see someone do it and see that it works, and B, I might be able to provide some additional context that would be really hard to write in words on a blog post. So it's a fairly short post, you'll see, not long. So let's go and walk through it, right? So our objective is we're going to be building a directory hierarchy. And if you think about it, a directory hierarchy is like the perfect thing to do recursively, right? Because a directory can have subdirectories, those subdirectories can have subdirectories, and all of those directories can have files. So it's sort of the perfect thing to be doing recursion on. So our goal at the end of the day is to have one app directory, HTML component, whatever you want to call it. We're going to have one of those that we're going to pass a directory to, and it's going to print all of its subdirectories and files recursively. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to be using the Angular CLI to create our project. If you're not familiar with the CLI, don't worry. I think you're going to catch on, especially if you've used any sort of CLI in the past. All this is doing is ng new recursive HTML. That's just creating a new Angular project called recursive-html. While that's going, I'm going to go ahead and walk through the data a little bit while that goes in the background. So this is the data we're going to be doing the recursion on. You can think of this initial object as like our root folder, and you'll see it has a name and then a content property. And in the content property, you can see the first item just has a name. So to us, the presence of just a name is going to signify a file and not a directory. And the second item in the list, like this one, has a name and a content property, right? So that signifies that our second item is a directory. The third item just has the name property, so it's just a file. So since in this data, our only directory is the second item, let's look to see what's in here, right? So we're looking at this right now. The first item between here and here is just the name property, so it's a file. And the second item has a content property, so it's a directory. So we have a root level directory, a subdirectory called directory1 subdirectory, and then a subdirectory, which we've called directory1 subdirectory. How creative, right? I believe that our project will have installed. I'm going to make sure the dependencies are installed. For some reason, I think the CLI stopped doing this by default, so I just went into the project and ran npm install. And that's only going to take a second. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy the contents out of this blog post into the project, and that's only going to take a second, and then I'll walk through what's actually happening. So the first thing that we're going to do is create our app directory component, the one that's going to be doing the recursion. I'll be using the CLI to do that. And walking through this command, ng generate a component, call it directory, inline the template, and don't create a test file. All right. And let's copy this. This is the contents of what's going to be in that file we just created through the command line. Let me open the project in my IDE, demos. So you'll see our directory component here if you've ran that command and you're following along. I'm just going to replace the contents of it. And then in our app component, and this is generated from the CLI if you're familiar with the CLI, So I didn't have to create this. This is already here. I'm going to go ahead and replace the contents of that. And I think that's it. Besides the data up here that we're going to have to create a file for to import in. And you can think of this data as just replacing some sort of like AJAX call that you might be doing in a real application, or anything along those lines. So directory data.ts is what I'm going to call it. All right, we just pasted a bunch of copy in. Let's walk through and see what's actually happening. So in our app component file, you'll notice that we're calling our app directory HTML, our component, whatever you want to call it, and then we're just passing in the data that we have hard-coded from our directory data file. And that's this directory we've already reviewed. So you can see here, this is the magic that we wanted to happen. The implementation is actually hidden in here, so let's go into it. This is our source app directory.component file. This is where the actual recursion happens. So what we're doing is we're checking to see if anything was passed in, and if it is, then we'll create a UL element. And we know from our data, and let's get the data up here side by side. It might be really helpful when viewing this data. I knew that was going to happen. Data. Okay, so we have, of course, we have the component that's actually doing the recursion on the left, and then the data that it's doing the recursion on the right. So we know the name property always exists. So we're just creating an li tag, putting the name there. And then this is where the actual recursion happens. So we're iterating over the content. And this ng4 is only going to do the iteration, obviously, if the content property exists. So you don't need to do anything. And actually, Angular won't let you do this. You don't need to say like ng if directory content.content. Actually, Angular is not going to let you put two structural directives in the same element here. It's going to complain about it. But this ng4 is smart enough to know to only iterate over this content property if it exists. So we're safe doing this. So we're saying if there's content, do a for loop over it, and then recursively add another app directory and pass it that content. And the output of this, let's run ngserve. So for those that aren't familiar with the CLI, ngserve is just spinning up a dev server for me. You'll see that it's available on localhost 4200. It might be different for you. I'm not sure if it will be. I doubt it. So this is our HTML recursively iterated over. And I'm just going to walk through some of the DOM really quick. So you'll see our first app directory. This is what we called from our app component file. This is the first UL that was generated. And then it printed out the name. And then one LI for each of the content pieces that we had in there. And then each of these is an app directory. And we knew that the first one was just a file, right? So if we go back to the data, the first thing in here is just a file. So I expect to see an app directory with its UL and just a file, right? There's nothing else in here. The UL only has one LI tag in it. Okay, that one was pretty straightforward. That recursion worked. Let's walk through the second one, and the second one is the one with all of our recursive directories in it. So it has UL property or tag and the name of the directory, and then, oh, look at that, another app directory. It worked. Awesome. So I hope this video was helpful in supplementing the blog post. I still recommend reading the blog post if you're confused. If you have any questions, please visit the website. There is a contact form on here. Just fill it out. You don't even need to leave your name, but I would leave your email if you want me to be able to respond to you in any sort of way. That or comment on the YouTube video, and I'll probably try and check on the comments every once in a while. All right, well, I hope that helped.